This video brought to you by jadedpainting.com. If you need your miniatures painted to a tabletop standard, check out jadedpainting.com. Hey everyone, welcome back to this Dark Potential painting tutorial. My name is Jay, and I'll be showing you how to paint this Xlanthos Commander, inspired by the artwork on the Dark Potential website. It's now time to do a second highlight on the model with weathered stone, the lightest member of the stone triad from Reaper Paints. For this highlight, I once again just used a dry brush technique and used a tiny bit of paint on my brush, even less than the previous dry brush, so I only picked up the very edges of each area and made just the highest points and the very edges really stand out and pop on the miniature. As using shades of gray, it's very important to have a nice gradient of different shades of gray. That way they'll really blend nicely together and the details will really pop and look really nice. As you can see here, there's a really nice gradient on the back, and all of the nice raised edges are really popping on the model. And now that the armor is basically done, it's now time to provide some more, I call it post shading, to certain areas to make them really stand out on the model. So we're going to use AGRAI's EARTHSHADE, a brown shading. Once again, I watered this shade down a little bit before using it, about a 1-to-1 mix with water. And I focused on the face, the insides of the arms and legs, as well as all the gaps in the armor, which you can see around the knees, behind the knees, where the quote-unquote ankles would be, and the stomach region. The reason why I used AGRAI's EARTHSHADE as opposed to painting is this shade will just tint all these areas a nice dark brownish gray, and it'll keep all the really nice details that we've been working so hard to keep. If you did another paint over this, you run the risk of removing these details. But in the end, it will tint the areas dark enough so that they will stand out and have some nice visibility from a distance. Plus, it will really maintain the organic and earthy tones that we're going for this tutorial. The Xlanthos can blend themselves into any area, so they would most likely choose earth tones to blend themselves in with the earth during times of combat. With the body now done, I turn my attention to all the blue areas by giving them all a watered down base coat of CALEDOR Sky. Once again, I used a 1-to-1 mix of CALEDOR Sky to paint thinner to make sure to get nice thin coats, and if I'm unhappy with the first coat, I just do another coat over it after it has dried. I focused on the areas such as the inner tubes of the gun, which I will be doing a nice gradient from dark to light, showing like energy is focusing up and building up and about to be shot off with the gun. And I also focused the blue areas on all the star symbols around the body, as well as the symbols on the back. As we will be building gradients on all of these blue areas, remember to just do as thin of a layer as possible, and for this base coat you don't need to necessarily get the perfect coverage, as we will be going over it with similar colors a little bit at a time to build up from really dark to really light. With these symbols or parts of the body, like the stars, it is very fine detail. So take your time, do very thin brush strokes with a very fine detailed brush, and make sure not to go outside the lines. If you do, however, you can turn this to your advantage and produce maybe a glowing effect over all these parts, like these areas were all glowing bright lights. But it's up to you. For the guns, I focused on the center of the gun, so the beam of light where it would be coming out, as well as the orb in the very center of the gun and a couple of the other parts that could be defined as orbs. And for each one, I will be trying to get a gradient from darkness on the outermost parts of these orbs to the lightest on the very centers. Other than the tiny holes in the carapace of his armor, which I will be doing later with a lighter blue, I decided that the only thing on the back to be blue are the two orbs and that one glowing rod on his very back, which is kind of a symbol on his back. The rest I'm going to keep the earth tones, so that there's a very stark contrast between his earth tones and the energy coming from him. The next color I used was TECLIS Blue, the first layer color associated with CALEDOR Sky from Games Workshop, similar to the Triad system from Reaper. For the gun, to build up a gradient, all I did was, for each color, I went a little bit shorter than the previous step, and that way I'll just build up a little bit at a time, layer by layer. And with all these blues, as I said, I did thin them down with paint thinner, so that each one's very thin, and it'll blend very easily with each other. For any orb or symbol on the body, I tried to keep the darkest areas towards the outside of them and trying to bring the lightness towards the inside. So each time I just did a smaller section of what I painted the previous time and focusing inwards. And the same went for the symbols on the back of him. For the next blue, I used a 1-to-1 mix of TECLIS Blue and LOTHERN Blue, the second layer color from Games Workshop associated with CALEDOR Sky. And this will produce a very intermediate color of blue. As with the rod, as I said the previous time, I just went a little bit shorter than when I did the previous step. So slowly but slowly I'm building up lighter and lighter colors, which will create a nice gradient. And with this step nearing completion, we can turn our attention to finishing up all the blues on all these blue areas, the eyes, the symbols on his back, and all the dimples in his carapace, as well as finishing the rest of the model.